I sat by the phone every Sunday for 3 years, waiting for it to ring, waiting for one of my children to call and ask how I was doing. Sometimes they did. Most Sundays they didn't. And each quiet afternoon made me feel a little smaller, a little less important, a little more invisible. Have you ever felt that way? You're not alone. So many of us at this stage of life have tied our sense of worth to a phone call that may or may not come. Not because our children don't love us, but because we've accidentally handed them the keys to our happiness. My name is Louise. I'm 90 years old, and I used to wait, just like you, until I stopped. In this video, I want to share 4 things I built instead, 4 things that gave me back my life. And the 4th one? It's the one nobody talks about, but it changed everything. If you've ever put your phone down feeling lonelier than before you picked it up, comment 1. If you've already stopped waiting, comment 0. For a long time, I didn't realize I had a ritual. Every morning, I'd wake up, make my tea, and sit at the kitchen table. Not to enjoy the quiet, not to start my day on my own terms. I sat there waiting to see if the phone would light up before I had to go looking for reasons to get out of my chair. That was my morning, not mine at all, really. It belonged to the possibility of a call that usually didn't come. Here's something I've noticed after 9 decades of living. The first hour of your day sets the tone for everything that follows. When you hand that hour to someone else's schedule, even silently, even just by hoping, you've already given away the best part of the day before it's even started. Let me tell you about a woman I know. Her name is Eleanor. She's 78 years old, and she lives about 20 minutes from where I used to live. Eleanor made the most beautiful coffee every morning, the good kind, ground fresh, poured slow. She had a little wooden table by the window that looked out onto her garden, and every morning she'd sit there with her cup and her phone beside it, just in case. Her daughter lived 3 states away and usually called on weekends, but Eleanor always had the phone there, just in case today was different. What happened over time is so quiet you'd almost miss it. The coffee got cold because she kept glancing at the screen. The garden outside the window stopped being something she saw. It became a blur behind whatever mood the phone delivered that morning. If her daughter called, the day felt light. If she didn't, Eleanor carried a heaviness she couldn't quite explain to anyone. Her joy had become a hostage to someone else's schedule. I'm not telling you Eleanor's story to judge her. I'm telling it because I was Eleanor, and maybe you are too. What changed for me, and what I want for you, is the decision to make that first hour yours before it belongs to anyone else. I'm not talking about a complicated routine. I'm talking about something simple and deliberate. For me, it was 20 minutes walking in the garden before I touched my phone, feeling the morning air, noticing whether the roses were opening, letting my thoughts settle without outside interference. Then I started writing down 3 things I was grateful for. Small things. The way the light came through the kitchen window. The fact that my knees still carried me to the garden and back. A memory that made me smile. Over weeks, something shifted. I started waking up looking forward to my walk, not dreading the silence of the phone. The morning became mine, and when a call came, it was a lovely addition to a day that had already begun well. When it didn't come, I barely noticed. Not because I stopped loving my children, but because I had already given myself something they couldn't give me. Your morning routine doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be impressive. It only needs to be yours. 15 minutes, a walk, a stretch, a cup of something warm without the phone beside it. something that says to you, "This day has already begun, and it began on my terms." A morning routine isn't selfishness. It's the foundation everything else is built on. Now, let's talk about something that took me a little longer to learn, and that's who you let into your life. There's a kind of loneliness that's hard to explain to people who haven't felt it. It's not the loneliness of being alone in a room. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who love you and still feeling unseen. Family love is real. I don't doubt that for a moment. But family love comes wrapped in history, in old roles, in the version of you they've always known. Your daughter sees her mother. Your son sees the woman who raised him. That's not nothing, but it's not everything either. What I'm talking about is the second thing worth building. At least one relationship outside your family, with someone who knows you as you are right now, not as who you used to be, and who chooses to spend time with you not out of duty but out of genuine enjoyment. Let me tell you about a woman named Dorothy. She was 81 when I met her at a community center I'd started going to, more out of restlessness than anything else. Dorothy had told herself for years that making new friends at her age was impossible. She'd lived in the same town for decades and watched most of her close friends either move away or pass on. She figured that chapter of life, the chapter where you find your people, was simply closed. One afternoon, she wandered into the library for a book and stayed because a small group of women were laughing so hard she wanted to know what was funny. That was 2 years before I heard this story. By the time she told me, those women were calling her before her children did, not because her children loved her less, but because those women had chosen her, in the present tense, with nothing owed between them. That's the difference worth understanding. Obligation and affection are not the same thing. Both have value, but only one can fill the particular emptiness that comes from feeling like a person who is waited on, managed, or checked in on, rather than a person who is genuinely wanted in the room. We tell ourselves we're too old to start over socially, too tired, too set in our ways to let new people in. I understand that feeling. After a certain point, the energy for small talk and new beginnings feels thin. But what I've found, and what Dorothy found, is that the right connection doesn't require much energy at all. It requires honesty. It requires showing up as yourself, not as someone's mother or grandmother or widow, just as a person who has lived a long time and has things to say worth hearing. You don't need many people. You need one or two who make your week feel fuller for having been in it. A neighbor you share a cup of tea with on Tuesdays, a woman from your church or your neighborhood or your library who makes you laugh in a way that surprises you, someone whose number you call not because something is wrong, but because something is right, and you want to tell someone. The loneliness you feel isn't a sign that people don't want you. It's a sign you haven't yet found your people. Now let's talk about something quieter, but I believe it's the most powerful of all four. Do you have a friend outside your family who truly lights up your week? Comment 1 for yes. Comment 0 if you're still looking. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it for a moment before you answer. Is there anyone in your life right now whose week gets a little better because you show up? Not because you need them, not because you called to ask for something, but because they were expecting you. And when you arrived, something in the room settled. If the answer came to you quickly, hold on to that. If you had to think about it, then this is the thing most worth building. There's a difference between being cared for and being needed. Both matter. But somewhere after 75, many of us quietly slip into a life where we are mostly on the receiving end. People check on us. People call to see if we're all right. People bring things by. And slowly, without meaning to, we begin to see ourselves the way we think they see us, as someone who requires attention rather than someone who gives it. That shift is subtle and it is dangerous, not because being cared for is wrong, but because the moment you stop believing you have something to offer, you begin to shrink. Let me tell you about a woman who lived near me for many years. Her name was Virginia. She was 83 and she had a son in another city who called reliably on Sundays, sometimes on Wednesdays too. She was grateful for those calls. But the rest of the week stretched out in a way that felt shapeless. She told me once that she'd started counting days, not toward anything in particular, just counting. Then a neighbor's granddaughter asked Virginia if she'd be willing to come to the elementary school library on Wednesday mornings. They needed someone to read aloud to the young children during story hour. The librarian had heard Virginia read to her own grandchildren at a neighborhood gathering and thought she had a gift for it. Virginia said yes, mostly because she didn't know how to say no politely. The first Wednesday she was nervous. The second Wednesday she brought a thermos of tea. By the third Wednesday, 2 little girls had saved her a seat. She told me later, and this is the part I want you to hear, she said, "I used to count the days until my son called. Now I count Wednesdays. What changed wasn't her son. He called just as often as before. What changed was that she had somewhere to be, someone who expected her, a small, specific purpose that existed whether or not the phone rang. You don't need to volunteer at a school. You don't need to take on anything large or exhausting. A neighbor who is older and needs company on Thursday afternoons. A friend who struggles to read and would love someone to sit with her over a letter from her doctor. A grandchild 2 towns away who lights up on a video call when you tell them a story from when you were young. The scale doesn't matter. What matters is that someone's week has a small, bright spot because you decided to show up. Purpose doesn't ask for your age. It only asks if you're still willing. And the last thing, this one surprised me most. It's the smallest of all 4, and somehow the one that changed everything. I'm going to tell you something I'm almost embarrassed to admit. For years, long after my children were grown, long after my husband had passed, long into what most people would call old age, I kept a small notebook on my nightstand. Every evening before I turned out the light, I'd open it and write down one thing I had done that day that helped someone. Just one. It didn't have to be significant. Some evenings I wrote, held the door for the woman with the grocery bags. Some evenings called Margaret because I knew she'd been having a hard week. Some evenings it was as small as left a note for the mailman because it was raining and he'd been doing his rounds without complaining. I started this habit not because someone told me to. I started it because I'd noticed something uncomfortable about myself. I had begun to move through days as a spectator, watching time pass, waiting to be visited, called, included. And at the end of those days, when I asked myself what I had done, the honest answer was very little. I hadn't been unhappy, exactly, but I hadn't been alive in the way I wanted to be. The notebook changed that, not because the things I wrote were important, but because the act of looking for something useful to do every single day, regardless of how I felt or how quiet the house was, rewired how I moved through the world. Instead of waiting for meaning to come to me, I started going out to find it, even in small things, especially in small things. Here is what I've come to believe after 90 years. The deepest fear most of us carry isn't the fear of death. It's the fear of becoming irrelevant, of reaching a day when the honest answer to the question, "What difference did your presence make today?" is nothing. That fear is worth listening to, not as a reason to despair, but as a compass. When you do one useful thing a day, you answer that fear directly. You say, "I was here. I noticed someone. I made a small part of the world a little easier or a little warmer." That's not nothing. Over weeks and months, it becomes something quietly extraordinary. Now bring all four things together: a morning that belongs to you, a friendship that exists because someone chose it, a place where you're expected and waited for, and one small useful thing every day that reminds you that you still have something to give. This isn't a list of tasks. It's a way of being, a decision to stop organizing your life around an absence, the call that didn't come, the visit that didn't happen, the acknowledgement that never arrived, and start building something that holds you up from the inside. And here's what no one tells you about building these four things. When you stop waiting, something shifts in the people around you too. I stopped waiting for calls on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd planned nothing special for that day. I woke up, made my tea, went to my garden, wrote my three things in the little notebook I kept by the window. I did my walk. I called a friend, not because I needed anything, but because I thought of her and thought she might want to hear a voice. I spent the afternoon doing something small but useful, and at the end of the day, I realized I hadn't checked my phone once, not out of bitterness, not out of punishment toward anyone. I simply hadn't needed to. My daughter called that evening, out of nowhere, just to talk. I'm not saying that's cause and effect. I can't promise you that if you build these four things, your children will suddenly call more often. What I can tell you is what I've watched happen in my own life and in the lives of women I've known well. When you stop being a hollow space waiting to be filled, people feel it. Not because they're calculating or strategic, but because human beings are drawn to presence, not to absence. They want to come home to something alive. And when you are busy, genuinely busy, living your own days with intention, they feel the warmth from a distance, and they find themselves wanting to be closer to it. You can't make your children want to call, but you can become a life so full that they feel it when they don't. These days, I wake up before the birds. I make my tea. I walk to the back of my garden, and I stand there for a few minutes just listening. Some mornings there's a neighbor's cat that finds its way to my fence. I've started leaving a small dish of water for it. That cat doesn't know my name. It doesn't know I'm 90. It comes because it knows something good is there. I think about that sometimes, about how simple it is, really, to become somewhere worth coming back to, not by making yourself smaller, not by waiting more quietly, not by needing less, but by building more life, more warmth, more usefulness, more connection that you chose and that chose you back. I hope you stop waiting, not because your children don't love you, but because you deserve a life that doesn't need to be put on hold. If this felt like a conversation worth having again, I'll be here. Come back, bring a friend who needs to hear it too. And if it helped, a like or a subscription means more of these conversations find the women who need them. Which of these four things do you want to build first? Comment 1 for the morning routine. Comment 0 if you're going to start by finding your people.